Council's Planning Committee, held here in the Grangemouth Community Education Unit, 6971 Abbots Road, Grangemouth. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, it's been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. First of all, I'll go to Mr. Henderson and ask if any apologies.
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies submitted by Councillor Murtagh.
Okay, thank you for that. Take you now to item 2 on your agenda. It's declaration of interest, and just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Any declarations at this time? I myself will be declaring an interest in item 9 and declare a non-financial interest on item 9 on the agenda, as I know the applicant personally and lived for a number of years in close proximity to the application site. Having regard to the objective test in the Council's Code of Conduct, I consider that I require to excuse myself from consideration of the item. I will leave the meeting at this point, and Councillor Kelly, the Deputy Convener, will take the chair for this item and then close the meeting. Thank you. That now takes us to item 3, which is the minute of meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 15th of March 2023. It's pages 3 to 11 on your agenda papers. Have we any questions arising from that minute, or can we agree the minute? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 4 on your agenda, the Falkirk Council on-street parking space for disabled persons, various streets number 7, order 20. The report is by Mr. Craig Russell, and it's pages 12 to 20. But before we call Craig in, I'm just going to pass over to Mr. Henderson just to give us an overview of the situation in relation to these applications. Mr. Henderson.
Thank you, Convener, and no doubt my colleague will pick up on similar points in the report that he'll be presenting. Just mindful that these kind of applications have not come before the Planning Committee very frequently. It would just be worthwhile picking up on the difference between this and the normal planning applications you will see. These applications are applications for a disabled person's parking space made by a blue badge holder, and they're made under roads legislation rather than planning legislation. The reason the applications are before you today is that there is a broad delegation to officers to determine these matters, but the legislation I'm holding in my hand at the moment says that where there's an objection which has been raised during the period for objections to be lodged that hasn't been withdrawn, that the matter is then considered by the Planning Committee. So what's before you today is a decision to make or not make the order for the disabled person's parking space. Another distinction that I would just point out from planning matters is that you'll be aware from standing orders that the committee can request a hearing on planning matters. In this case, there's a particular statutory procedure for hearings. So if further information was to be requested by way of a hearing, in that case, what would happen is that the council would request that a reporter be appointed from a list held by the Scottish ministers, and that reporter would then conduct the hearing procedure and report back to the committee at a later date. So it's not the case that you can have a normal form of hearing, it's a particular statutory form of hearing that needs to take place. So I'm probably stealing Mr. Russell's thunder on a number of these points. And with these points made, I'll pass back to you, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, thanks for that, Mr. Henderson. We're at item 4, the Falkirk Council on-street parking space for disabled persons, various streets number 7, order 20, pages 12 to 20 in your agenda, and we'll go straight back to Craig Russell for the report. Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Convener. This report concerns an application for a disabled person's parking space on Kilbirnie Terrace in Denny. As Ian Henderson has mentioned, it is not an application for planning permission. In terms of the Council's scheme of delegation, this decision requires to be made by committee as unresolved objections have been received to the making of the order. An application was received by a qualifying person and a suitable location identified. The location is shown on page 16 of your report. 2 objections were received and we responded to these. These are anonymised and detailed on pages 18 to 20. The objections have not been removed, hence this report being placed before you.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for members. Any member like to come in at this stage? Are you happy enough with the report and the recommendation contained within? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much for that. Agreed, thank you.
Convener, sorry, I was just checking the recommendation. It doesn't actually give a decision. It actually, the recommendation just says members are asked to consider terms of the report, including objections, and determine whether the order should be made, rather than an actual decision.
Thank you, and Councillor Bowes is quite right. What's before you is a report asking you to consider the terms of it and the objection that's been lodged, and you're being invited to decide whether or not the committee agrees to make or not make the order. My sense of the discussion there was that members may be satisfied and would be in agreement to making the order, but that could be clarified. Convener.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Councillor Bowes, for that. Okay, then that takes us to.
Sorry,
yep.
just to cover that off, and the reason for that is the other parking space have been surveyed and they are regularly used by other cars, so that's why I would agree to grant the order.
Okay, thanks once again, Councillor Bowes. So everybody in agreement with that? Right, thank you. That takes us to item 5, Falkirk Council on-street parking space for disabled persons, various streets, number 7 to 20. It's pages 21 to 27. We'll go straight back to Craig Russell. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Convener, and at the risk of repeating myself, this report concerns an application for a disabled person's parking space on Slamanan Road in Avon Bridge. It is not an application for planning permission. An application was received by a qualifying person and a suitable location identified. This is shown on page 25 of your report. 1 objection was received and responded to as detailed on page 27. The objection has not been removed, hence this report being placed before you today.
Thank you, Craig. Open it up again for members. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. I see the objection talks about the difficulty for the person who's objecting to get in and out their own driveway. Can we have a wee bit of comment on it? I'm trying to read down this, but can we just cover that off rather than just the basis of the suitable bay?
You heard the point, Craig, if you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, certainly, Convener. I mean, the objection that's been submitted, as Councillor Bowes mentioned there, the objection is on the basis that the disabled bay may obstruct visibility for the person leaving their driveway. Our position on that is that on-street parking is common on that side of the road, and we don't view it as a concern, having in regard to the legislation and the responsibility placed on the council to provide these spaces.
Back to Councillor Bowes on the response you got there.
That's fine. I'm quite happy with that. And in that case, then I'll propose that we approve.
Quite happy with that. Second that. Anybody otherwise minded? I'm looking at this. I'm looking at the screen to make sure that all members there are ensured that they're going to be heard. Somebody got their hand up there. Councillor Colley.
No, it was a thumbs up just to actually agree.
That takes us to item 6 on your agenda this morning, partial change of use first floor only from public house Sudaneris to house and multiple occupation HMO at 95A Newlands Road, Grangemouth, AK3 8NT for Mr Amran Ali. It's pages 28 to 45 on your agenda. The report will be by Mr Mr. Dryden, but just to state quite clearly at the beginning, an application has been made for a deputation by Ms. Marion Randalls as an objector to be received, and an application has also been made by Mr. Inderpal Gill, agent for the applicant. So we'll take that in order first. Is everybody quite happy to hear the objector and the agent? Agreed to that?
Agreed.
That's fine then.
Agreed.
Great.
Everybody agreed? Okay, thank you for that. And we'll now pass to Mr. Dryden to give us the report. Thank you, Mr. Dryden.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks for that. Jack, could I ask if you could pull up the location plan is already shown in the report before you this morning on page 45, but if I could ask you, Jack, to put the proposed plans and elevations drawing up on the screen, which will actually show what's being proposed here, shows the elevation of the building and obviously a floor plan. And as Convener has outlined, this is a partial change of use of the upper floor of 95 Newlands Road to form a house in multiple occupation. The details of that are covered in 1.2 of your paragraph. You'll note this is to form 16 bedrooms with a communal kitchen, living area, bathrooms and laundry provision. Turning to the report on paragraph 3, site history, I would draw your attention to paragraph 3.3, which gives details of the planning history and in particular the relevant and extant planning consent that exists at present. This is for change of use from a public house to form 2 shops, hot food takeaway on the ground floor, and 7 class 2, which is kind of office financial professional services under the use classes order on the upper floor. And the proposal before you this morning is to substitute that upper floor area. So you can see from the drawings on the screen before you is that here's the floor plan of the upper floor, showing the number of bedrooms with the communal living area. Jack, could I maybe move you onto the site photograph, which is also there, and it will give members of the committee and those in attendance today the actual photograph as it stands. Some, as you might note from this photograph, works have commenced on site, albeit this is in the ground floor, and this is in line with the planning permission that has already been granted for the works on the ground floor area alone. So the proposal that's before you this morning would substitute the upper floor area, as I've said, from office use to a house in multiple occupation. Turning to the consultations, you will see on paragraph 4.1 on page 30 of your report that the roads unit have been consulted and have raised concerns in respect of limited space for off-street parking. There are no other objections being raised from Environmental Health or the Health and Safety Executive. The site does fall within the outer consultation zone, but it certainly there is no objections given the scale of the proposal and what it represents. I would also draw attention to the County Council concerns. These are highlighted in paragraph 5.1 of your committee papers, and also you will note in the public representations that have been lodged with this application, there have been 16 contributions and the details of those are summarised in paragraph 6.1. As part of the officer assessment, you will see, turning the page into your development plan, which now comprises National Planning Framework 4, which was approved earlier this year, along with your current development plan of Local Development Plan 2. There's a policy assessment of the proposal as it stands, which concludes that this is in a local centre and that generally is in support of the policies. As part of the assessment, as part of material considerations, I would draw members' attention to the assessment of the public representations, which is on page 35 of your report this morning, and in particular, starting at paragraph 7b2, you will note how the officers have viewed the representations received, in addition to obviously the assessment of the development plan. I would draw attention to paragraph 7b3 of your report, where clearly the issue of car parking has been noted and acknowledged by officers having regard to comments from our colleagues in roads. The view officers have taken here that there is parking provision on the site, bearing in mind that there is an extant planning permission for office use on the site, and therefore it is felt on balance that the level of parking required actually can be accommodated on the site. Given the nature of the HMO and the transient, it may not all be that occupiers all have cars, but it's considered by officers on balance that this would be acceptable and would not raise off-street parking or road safety concerns to the detriment to not support this application. I would also draw attention to paragraph 7.b8, and as you'll note, representations have raised concerns of antisocial behaviour. This is not a matter for the planning committee. This is not material planning consideration. This is covered in the Circular 212, which is a matter for the licensing authority, which is a different part of the planning legislation. And I would certainly, although there's comments been made about the desire to have it reopened as a public house, that is not what's before you this morning. We can't control what's being proposed. We have to, we're obliged to determine what is put before us, and therefore we are assessing the application as it stands and what's been submitted for our consideration and your consideration. I would also draw attention to a query has been raised by representations about name notification, and can confirm that the name notification has been duly carried out in accordance with the regulations, and that all neighbours were notified. And in addition to that, the application was also advertised in the local press. So, turning to conclusion, convener, it's considered on balance that this proposal does meet the provisions of your development plan, which is National Planning Framework 4 and Local Development Plan 2. While obviously it is acknowledged that there are concerns about parking, it's concluded on balance, given that the site already has the benefit of planning permission for an alternative use of office accommodation. This is a substitute of that element of the proposal, and it's considered on balance that there is parking there that would meet the needs of the proposal. It would not be to the detriment to such an extent to not support the application, and the recommendation before you is to grant planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dryden. It's an opportunity now for the deputation request. And first of all, could we call forward Marion Randalls, an objector to be received? And if Marion would like to come forward. You want to bring, could somebody? Thank you. You'll have a 10-minute period to raise your objections. Then there'll be an opportunity then for members of the committee to ask any questions. Okay, right. Okay, carry on. Thank you.
My name's Marion, and thank you for your time today and allowing me to speak at this meeting. I'm here to represent my neighbours who can't attend due to work commitments or illness regarding the planning application for the HMO in the Old Elwyn building. I'm hoping that you have all been able to read the email which I sent you regarding this application. People in Grangemouth do not want a transient community. They would like people to move to the town and set up home to work to contribute to the community. There are already 9 HMOs in Grangemouth. They're not fully utilised, and we don't feel there's another need for another, especially in a highly residential, deprivation-stricken area. Newlands area is one of the worst places in Grangemouth for poverty, especially for children, and we feel that this may make it worse. We are already a dumping ground for people with additional barriers, for example with drinking drugs, and we see this on a daily basis. What benefit, if anything, is this HMO going to bring to our community? Will locals be offered the jobs? Contractors mostly travel by car to work sites in the town now and don't stay so much unless it's in one of the local hotels. I know this from my own research, because they can have their needs met without having to cook and clean for themselves. So what our main concern is as well, if this isn't going to be used for contractors, who's going to be in it? It could be anybody. Sorry, I'm all mixed up. We should be encouraging local companies to take on local workers, not to bring in outside workers. We need to bring some. The town's a mess. The town's a disgrace. But what we would like to know, where exactly are 16 parking spaces going to go? Because there's certainly never anybody came along our street or Central Avenue when the schools are coming out or going in, when there's deliveries and the road's getting blocked in and out of Central Avenue. We can't move. We have drives in our street. We can't get in or out our drives because they just park anywhere, and that's any time of the day or night. And where's there going to be a smoking area? We're concerned, as before, there's a fire exit. There's one fire exit out the back. If they use that to come out to smoke, that's overlooking our gardens. We don't know if there's any more windows getting put in, but it'll overlook our gardens. And if there's parking round the back of the building, the wall's already been knocked down twice. Into a resident's garden, they've had a lorry in their garden twice. We are constantly out picking up the rubbish, bearing in mind it's our back gardens that look onto the Elwyn. I'm 4 blocks away, I get rubbish, and I know it's theirs because their box number and their address is on the papers that come for the distributor of the newspapers, and we're constantly out picking up that and plastic. We would like to know, and on the subject of rubbish, Falkirk Council are the 5th council to buy vapes because of the implications of litter, so I'm sure you can understand where we're coming from with litter as well. We're worried about how this is going to be managed or supervised, especially regarding issues which have been raised in the past. Us as locals are aware of everything that went on in there. We already suffer from lots of antisocial behaviour, and we feel this will make it worse. The police have previously raised concerns, but it's getting to the stage now, if we're reporting antisocial behaviour, the police didn't respond. So if it's going to get worse, where does that leave us? And neighbours are worried about their house crises. Would anybody here buy a house that was next to an HMO in a highly residential area with young kids? Our community would like to be listened to with a chance to be included in any decision making in our area. Can you please reach out and listen to the residents? And I would also like to thank you for listening, taking in our concerns both for the day from today, all the objections raised and the concerns in my email into consideration. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. You spoke very well on behalf of your community. Now it's an opportunity now for members to ask any questions they would like. Any questions to Marion? And I'm looking at the screen now. Is there any questions for members that are on remote? No. Yes, Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks, Marion, for coming forward and giving us an outline of your and the community's experiences in relation to this location. Previously, when it was the Elwyn, could you just give us a bit of an expansion on what the parking situation was like? Did you feel like there was enough car parking spaces on site previously?
The car park's never been used. It's never been used. It's only used for delivery drivers. There's never been an issue, even when the Elwyn was open before the occupiers now went in, there was never an issue with parking. I've stayed in the same street for 21 years. I've drank in the Elwyn. We've never had, I mean, there's residents here that stayed in the street for 40 years. We've never had as much bother in our area as what we've had the last 10 years.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you're obviously talking about other HMOs in the area. Have you got any experiences or understanding of what the parking situation is in and around those HMO areas?
Well, I know down the town there's 2 car parks. There's Asda, there's the car park at Iceland. There's plenty of parking spaces. And I've never heard it being an issue.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions to Marion? No? Okay then, Marion, thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. It's now an opportunity for an application has been made, a deputation request for Mr. Inderpal Gill, who's the agent for the applicant. Mr. Gill, is he on remote?
Yes, I am.
Okay, sir, you have 10 minutes and then you'll be available for any questions from members. Okay, carry on, sir. Thank you.
Thanks so much. My name's Inderpal Gill. I'm representing the applicant. I guess I'd just like to take this opportunity to reassure locals that of the type of resident we're expecting for the HMO. The client would like to have long-term contracts with local companies to house their workers. It's not going to be illegal immigrants, which was stated as one of the comments. The client would prefer a hands-off kind of approach, so longer-term contracts, which kind of helps with the lack of transit community. Like a high turnover property is not what the client is looking for. With regards to parking, I think that was the only real objection from any of the statutory consultees. We have submitted in the drawing, the site location plan drawing number 041_LOC, a plan for 16 parking spaces. This also allows for a service access to the ground floor units, although it's not noted as such. With regards to kind of the community's comments on providing for locals, 3 units on the ground floor, 3 local people have already expressed interest in leasing these units, which in turn obviously provides job opportunities for the locals. However, this isn't going to be financially viable for the client unless we have provision for HMO on the upper floor. I'd like to agree with generally the report that complies with the National Planning Framework 4, and would encourage you to follow the advice set out in the document. Thank you so much for. Yeah, just fairly short. I think the report is fairly positive to the development and the reuse of the Elwyn. I think a lot of the antisocial behaviour and the rubbish that's been discussed is due to the previous use as a public house, which I don't believe will be the case with the proposed use.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that. It's now an opportunity for members to ask Mr. Gill any questions they have. I'm looking at the screen. I'm also looking, Councillor Redmond.
Oh, thanks. Just a quick question. It was really, you were saying that it wouldn't be financially viable with just the shop units. Are you meaning that because you've got a HMO, you're benefiting the community by giving them a discount on the shop units? I didn't quite understand that. Could you just maybe clarify?
No, so the overall build becomes financially viable at the point where we include the units in the ground floor if we can get occupancy in the upper floor, essentially.
Right, thanks. And then just the other question was, have you had any sort of correspondence with local companies or contractors with regards to getting a deal in place to house their workers? Have you done anything with that yet?
I don't believe the client has, because there's obviously no permission in place. However, just anecdotal evidence from our involvement with other HMOs in Grangemouth, that tends to be something that is kind of fairly well received by companies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redmond. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Any other questions to Mr. Gill from either the floor here or remote? Councillor Flynn. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, convener. Mr. Gill, you touched on briefly there on the aspect of rubbish and litter, etc., which of course is a major antisocial thing across many areas. Can I just ask, and the objector did, I believe, touch on the fact that people would be smoking outside. What action would you propose that your client will do in terms of keeping the area clean and tidy in advance of, raising any complaints with litter about and cigarette ends and that sort of thing? I'm thinking about providing litter bins and regular cleaning around that area. Have you got any plans from your client for that?
Well, the client actually owns a business run in that area, so obviously has a vested interest in ensuring that there is management of the litter and cigarette ends. I guess he already has a cleaner in place for the site, so that's kind of how he would manage that. He's already employed a cleaner, and there's obviously a specific one for the HMO upstairs as well.
Right. Okay. So it'd be regularly kept clean and tidy, and obviously reduce any complaints. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Gill. Yeah. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Any other questions to be directed at Mr. Gill at this stage? Councillor Bowes.
Mr. Gill, last year the planning application was approved to put in the shops and obviously to put the office facility upstairs. It's a really quick change from only having put in that application in last year. I would have assumed at that point that the business case would have been looked at for the shops, for the offices. with the shops down below. Is there a specific reason why the necessity to change that now from offices to an HMO?
Yeah, so essentially a kind of a fairly detailed study was carried out by our client to assess the occupancy rates of offices in Grangemouth, and then additionally the occupancy of HMOs, and it's essentially financial viability to ensure that the building can be maintained with a higher occupancy as possible. So initially that report, that investigation wasn't concluded when we made the initial application, which kind of now come to a conclusion, and that's what the client decided to go for.
Okay, I find that quite unusual that you would put in for an application last year and without having concluded your investigations, but that's your business, not mine.
Hey, thank you for that, Councillor Bowes. Have we any other direct questions to the agent, Mr. Gill? Somebody got their hand up there?
Yep. Yeah, it's
Councillor
myself.
Steenbank, yes, come in, sir.
Thank you, convener. I've just got a couple of questions here. Mr. Gill, you talked about conversations you'd had with prospective tenants around wanting a more long-term and probably something that would look a bit more sustainable in our planning policies. Could you just elaborate on those conversations you've had with prospective tenants and just define what you mean by long-term?
So there's two aspects to this. So the comments with regards to prospective tenants were for the retail units in the ground floor. The conversations with regards to the HMO have not yet been had because there's been no permission in place. If that makes sense. So the tenants that have expressed interest are of local people to tenant the ground floor in the retail units.
Yep. Thank you very much. That does clarify that. I'm looking at 7A9, and this may be something I will ask of officers later as well. But it details that there's the demand for HMO accommodation to house temporary contract workers. Is that congruent with what you expect to be the demand for the HMO property if you're given permission to do?
Yeah, 100%. I would say that's kind of the focus of the client. He's not looking for to house, as noted, illegal immigrants or anything like that. The focus of the marketing for these units will be for contract workers, and the client has a preference for longer term contracts. Yes, for sure.
And what assessment of demand has taken place, if any, has of current demand?
I think the clients reached out to some local estate agents. We have some experience in conversion of HMOs in Grangemouth already, and it's anecdotal, but it's positive.
Thank you very much. No more questions, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Steenbank. Once again, I'm going around the table here and go on screen to see if any other questions for Mr. Gill at this stage. Councillor Sinclair, thank you.
Thanks, convener. Mr. Gill, thank you for your for the information you provided this morning. Just a couple of brief questions. Firstly, the nature of a HMO would mean that despite long-term contracts, the residents within the HMO will be transient in terms of short-term periods of time to complete a contract and move on. What impact assessments have you and your company, perhaps your client, made on the impact that will have on the community surrounding the HMO, and what information has that given you to inform that it's a HMO is required rather than a different type of residential property?
I guess no formal reporting with regards to the impact on the community around there. However, an impact on the businesses in that area of Central Region, of Central Avenue, sorry. Very rarely do you ever see a unit empty in that area. And obviously the more people there is there to spend money locally can only have a positive impact on the economy of the area. With that, there's been no formal, investigation done into that.
Okay, thanks, convener. You'll be aware that there's only a certain amount of operating times within the properties that have retail properties round about there. Shift working therefore would necessitate that all times of day. I wouldn't expect the shops to be open at all times of day for those workers, for example, to benefit from going in and out of there. However, I'll move on. There's been a few comments about traffic, the impacts of traffic, the impacts of local schools of traffic. What assessments have you carried out to see what the impact of that is on the local community as well, and whereby an increase in traffic would impact them, for example, or a decrease in traffic would impact them, and what mitigations are you planning to put in place to ensure that that's not a concern?
The mitigation is the proposal for the one-way system in and out of the on-site parking. We don't believe the parking situation would be any worse than the office units that were previously approved. But I guess no formal survey has been undertaken of traffic volumes in that area. I personally, just from personal experience of that area, I can understand the concerns. So that's kind of the reason that we implemented that one-way system in and out of the car park, to kind of give a better flow in the car parking in that area.
Okay, and lastly, convener, how would you ensure that one-way system is adhered to?
I think the first point is signage. Secondly, physically, two vehicles couldn't pass each other going the opposite way. So there'd be no barrier in place. But yeah, signage and physical barriers, I guess, to ensure that only one vehicle can pass.
Okay, thanks, convener.
Thank you very much for your input there, Councillor Sinclair. Okay, round the table and on remote. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, convener. I'd like to ask Mr. Gill, the parking for the residents will be in the rear of what used to be the car park for the Elwyn itself. That's correct, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And there'll be allocated bays. I take it that will run along the outer wall.
I'm just giving a second. I'll pull up the relevant drawing. Yes, so it's the outer wall, yeah.
Right, and those are the boundaries of the local residents, and therefore, if it's shift work, as you've already alluded to, that these people will be, that your residents will be working on, and they'll obviously be working for local companies, residents will be disturbed by the noise of the cars coming and going at different periods prior to the start of these people's shifts. Are you also going to put up signs, saying, please be aware of our neighbours, keep quiet?
Yeah, that's certainly something the client is open to do. However, I don't believe that it will cause any more noise disturbance than the Elwyn did, and while that was open. Additionally, the residents, mainly the houses, are set quite far away from the proposed parking spaces.
No, they're not.
The only exception is number 1 on Central Avenue. Other than that, they're set quite back from the gardens. So I don't see that being a major concern, but yes, certainly the client is happy to introduce any signage with regards to noise.
My concern was that the times that the shifts start, for example, most of the INEOS contractors start at 6 o'clock in the morning, which will mean that your residents will be leaving at 5:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30 to start a shift there. That will undoubtedly disturb the local residents. That was why I was asking. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for your input, Councillor Forrest. I'm going to Provost Bissett now. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, convener. Good morning, Mr. Gill. I wonder if you tell me how many rooms there are in the HMO.
I've got 16 proposed rooms.
Okay.
Yeah,
And-
16 proposed
and-
rooms.
Just regarding climate change obligations, it's quite an old building, so do you have any proposals to sort of meet the climate change targets? What things are you going to put in, sort of solar panels or anything like that?
We've not yet defined the energy requirements of the HMO. It is different from the office requirements, of course.
Good in future, maybe get planning for as solar panels.
Yeah, the client is open to applying for application for planning.
Excuse me, Mr. Gill. We heard the voice coming in there. There was no introduction to who the voice is. The question is to yourself, if you want to introduce another party, you've got to explain who that party is and what relevance they have to this meeting.
Okay, no problem. This is the applicant, and he is obviously relevant because he's the applicant to the party. I'll just introduce him now. You want to introduce yourself?
Speak up. Hello, this is Amran Ali. The application submit.
No, the applicant.
Applicant.
Okay, we're answering questions for Provost Bissett. Apologies, but could you maybe just ask the relevant questions again?
Okay, thank you, Convener. Given the current climate change crisis, I'm just keen to know, it's an old building, the L1, and I'm keen to know what adaptations you're willing to make to the premises to reduce the carbon emissions.
See, like, because of the price of lecky, I'm actually keen on putting solar panels, but being a commercial building, I think we've got to apply for planning permission maybe regarding that, but we will be looking at solar panels definitely, and anything else we could recommend. Definitely solar panels, just with the price of power being sky high.
So is it something you considered when taking on this property? To
be honest with you, I've been thinking, obviously over the last year, the price of electricity has been through the roof. Definitely looked into it. Obviously, being a commercial building, I think you need planning permission, but it's definitely something we are definitely going to go ahead with, providing we get planning permission.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks for your input there, Provost. Any other questions to Mr. Gill, the agent, or the applicant that just seems to be by his side at the moment? Any other questions? Nothing on screen? Nothing around the table? Okay, Mr. Gill, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's now an opportunity to enter debate, but I would like to say at the very start that there's an awful lot of issues here that give me great concern. Some of them that, to be honest with you, I would prefer if I seen the locus of the site, and I would propose right away that we go on a site visit.
I'll second that, Convener.
Double site.
Is anybody otherwise minded?
Convener, I'm quite aware of the site and where it is, where it's situated. In fact, I visited there last night for a retail opportunity, shall we say. But yeah, I think it's, I'm happy with my understanding of the site.
Right, okay, thank you for that. But as you say, you're aware of it, but members like myself aren't aware of the locus. Some of the issues in relation to the car parking and that, we've actually got to have a look for ourselves to make ourselves comfortable before we take a decision. This would be an unaccompanied site visit, and I'll just refer to my colleague, Mr. Henderson, in relation to the proposal. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for clarifying it would be unaccompanied, and by that you mean that it would take place without the requirement for a hearing also taking place in site. It would purely be an inspection of the physical characteristics of the site by the planning committee supported by officers. Thank you, convener.
Councillor Colley, did MD on the screen want to come in at this, or are they quite happy with the decision for a site visit?
It's all right, I'll come in, convener. I think it probably does make sense to have a site visit, particularly around the issues that have been raised around school times, and I think probably the timing of it would be quite important as well. I did want to quickly raise something, and I wonder if you'd indulge me, convener. I think there's been several mentions of the term illegal immigrants, and I think the language is so important. For starters, that there would not be an HMO for illegal immigrants, and there's no question of this being an HMO for any purpose other than workers anyway. But I think the term illegal immigrants, it's been bandied about, and to mean people who are currently claiming asylum and they are housed by the Home Office under contract. And I think it's very important that as a committee, when we're discussing this, that we're very clear what we mean at any point, and that we don't countenance the use of the term illegal immigrants. And I think I'm very uncomfortable with the usage of it.
Councillor, no, sorry. Councillor Colley, I think we're all the same. There's no member either on the room or on a remote had used that terminology. The terminology was only used by the agent, and I appreciate you coming in on that point. Okay then, a site visit been moved and seconded. Is there anybody otherwise minded? Councillor Steenbank.
No, I'm not otherwise minded, convener. I'm not sure whether this would be the best opportunity, but I do have a question to clarify NPF4 policies as applied to this report. I'm not sure whether that would be better asked after we've had the opportunity for a site visit or not, or whether there's an officer available.
Yeah, I think you maybe better wait until after the site visit, Councillor Steenbank.
Yeah,
okay, so we're agreed to an accompanied site visit. Okay, agreed. Thank you everybody for your consideration.
Convener.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't agree more with my colleague, Councillor Colley. And I would request that this site visit is done at school time when there are children either going or coming to school, because there is a primary school close by, and I think it would be very important to see the site as it is at that point.
Okay, Councillor, we'll take on board what you said, and I think it does make sense. We'll discuss with officers, and I'm sure that we can make it happen, because it makes an awful lot of sense. Okay then. So just once again, with a motion, does there anybody else want to come in? Any other questions? There's a motion been moved and seconded that we have an unaccompanied site visit, and preferably at a time when the schools are in operation, just to see exactly the situation and determine the situation at that time, especially with the ongoing traffic. Everybody agree? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That takes us to item 7 on your agenda this morning, extension to dwelling house at 45 Henderson Crescent, Larbert, for Mr. Anton Allen. It's pages 46 to 56 on your agenda. Now, the report is by Mr. Ryan McDonough, who is Ryan is a new officer. I think this is his first time at a planning meeting, and we wish him all the best. just before we bring Ryan in for the report, a deputation request has been made by Mr McLaughlin, an objector for the application to be received. I'm quite happy to move that we grant the opportunity for Mr McLaughlin to speak. Agreed? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now pass on to Ryan for the report. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Convener. Yes, it's me, Ryan McDonough, who's the case officer for this application, and I'm happy to take you through the report. At this point, I would ask if Jack is able to share the existing floor plans and elevational drawings. So the application site is located within a residential cul-de-sac at Henryson Crescent within the settlement of Larbert. The application site consists of a large detached two-storey dwelling house with an existing rear garden room extension and associated garden ground to the front and rear of the property. In addition, the rear garden of the plot contains a single-storey wood-framed proposed outbuilding along with a detached garage to the west of the dwelling house. The application before committee is for a single-storey flat-roofed extension towards the rear of the property. The proposed extension would encompass parts of the existing garden room, however would be of a larger footprint and stretch almost the full width of the rear wall of the dwelling house. In addition, the ridge height of the current garden room is greater than the total height of the existing extension before committee today. If Jack can share the proposed elevations. So the proposed extension would be of a contemporary design and include sections of smooth white render, facing brick, dark grey cementitious board, along with timber cladding. The rear elevation of the extension would be predominantly glazing, with sliding doors into the rear garden. A single opaque window is also proposed on the western and eastern side elevations. The proposed extension would allow for the creation of a larger open plan kitchen, living and dining room. In addition, a music room is also proposed within the footprint of the previous garden room. So in terms of consultations, it was not considered appropriate to consult any internal or external bodies in respect of this application. This is mainly due to the size of the application in terms of a householder. In terms of representations, 4 letters of objection have been submitted on this application, and these have been summarised in section 6.1 of the report. I would note, however, that these 4 letters have been submitted by the same objector. The points raised within these have been analysed by officers and summarised between section 7b.6 and 7b.15 of the report. I would ask then if Jack's able to share the photographs so that committee are able to get a feeling of the characteristics of the application site. So in terms of planning assessment, the planning assessment of this application is detailed in section 7 of the report. As committee are aware, Scottish Government recently adopted National Planning Framework 4. As such, this is now part of our development plan alongside LDB2. So policy HC08 residential extensions and alterations of the local development plan 2 states that extensions and alterations to residential properties should only be supported where the scale, design and materials are sympathetic to the existing building. In this instance, it considered that the scale of the new extension is appropriate in terms of the application site. In relation to design and material choices, it is noted that the extension is of a contemporary design. However, this approach is common across the Falkirk Council area, and in this instance, it is not considered to be unsympathetic to the existing property. HC08 also states that extensions and alterations will not be supported where they significantly impact the degree of amenity, daylight, or privacy enjoyed by neighbouring properties. The application has been assessed in terms of relevant guidance, and the extension would not pose an issue in terms of overshadowing or loss of light. This is further shown by the 45-degree line on the elevational drawings falling short of the neighbouring property's habitable rooms. In regards to privacy, there are no windows proposed within the side or rear elevations, which would enable an unacceptable level of viewing into neighbouring properties. The planning authority are therefore satisfied that neighbourhood amenity would not be significantly impacted. So as committee are aware, the householder permitted development order allows for a degree of alterations and extensions to residential properties without the prior consent of the planning authority. In this instance, it should be noted that if the extension was reduced by approximately 0.15 metres in terms of eaves height, the application would comply with Class 1A of the permitted development order. As such, an application would not be required and the planning authority would be unable to control the application in relation to planning policies. That being said, however, the planning authority would not deem the application to be contrary to planning policy. Overall, the proposal is considered to comply with the Falkirk Council Local Development Plan 2 in terms of policy HC08 residential extensions and alterations. The application is also considered to comply with policy 16 quality homes, as well as the wider vision set within National Planning Framework 4. Furthermore, the application is considered to comply with the non-statutory guidance contained within SG03, which falls alongside the Local Development Plan. In conclusion, it is considered that there are no material considerations which justify an offer or recommendation of the contrary. It is thus recommended that planning permission is approved subject to the conditions outlined in this report. I'm happy to take any question the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's now an opportunity for the objector, Mr. McLaughlin, to speak in terms of his objection. Are you on screen there, sir?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you have 10 minutes, and then there'll be an opportunity then for members, whether they're in the building or online, to ask any relevant questions. Okay, you have 10 minutes starting now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. I live at the neighbouring property to the north of the application site. I want to look at the specific requirements of the development plan and to ask you, as members of the Planning Committee, to decide for yourself whether or not you think the application complies with it. The development plan now comprises National Planning Framework 4, Falkirk LDP 2, and Falkirk Council's Supplementary Guidance SG03 on residential extensions and alterations. As I'm sure you're all aware, the overarching provisions of NPF 4 were brought into force in February, and they now sit at the top of the planning hierarchy. Policy 16 provides householder development proposals will be supported where they do not have a detrimental impact on the character of the home and the surrounding area in terms of size, design and materials. Size, design and materials and the character of the surrounding area. That's the requirements of NPF 4. I'd like you to focus on those points when considering the application today. I want to say at the outset that I don't have a problem with the applicant building an extension. They're perfectly entitled to do that. But the proposal they've come up with is so out of keeping with the character of the area in terms of its size, design and materials that, in my view, it doesn't meet the fundamental requirements of Policy 16. So let's look at their proposal. The proposed extension will run the full width of the rear of the property, extending over 10 metres in width, 4.5 metres in depth and 3.2 metres in height. It's a very large extension, entirely flat roofed and substantially finished in white render on the north and east elevations. So what is the character and architectural style of the surrounding area? The applicant's property has a traditional red-coloured brick and black tile construction. There are 95 houses in the overall estate. Every other house has a traditional coloured brick and tile construction. None of them are rendered and none have full-width rear extensions or flat roofs. All of the neighbouring properties have angled roof pitches and any garden rooms or extensions don't dominate the rear of the properties. Indeed, when the development was built, great care was taken to ensure that garden rooms, detached garages, even substation buildings had angled roof pitches and tiled roofs rather than flat roofs. They're also all constructed of matching brickwork to achieve a harmonious look. No planning permission has been granted to any other owner in the estate for a rear extension of this size, scale or design. The planning officer says it doesn't matter that there are no similar examples nearby and that this can't be a determining factor in the assessment of the application. I think it does matter because this speaks to the character of the area. The fact that nothing has been built within the development of this size and style tells you that it's out of keeping with the area and that it doesn't comply with Policy 16. Turning now to the details of Falkirk Council's Supplementary Guidance SG03. This was drafted to provide more detailed guidance on how particular local development plan policies should be applied in practice. I think it's important to point out that SGO3 isn't just guidance you can choose whether or not to adhere to. It has a statutory basis and it forms part of the development plan. As you know, it's a legislative requirement that planning decisions are made in accordance with the development plan, and that means they have to comply with all of the requirements of SGO3. Paragraph 2.1 provides, all extensions and alterations to existing buildings should relate well to the character and context of the existing area. They should be sympathetic to the dwelling and surroundings in terms of scale, positioning, details and materials to ensure that the development results in a balanced appearance, particularly if the neighbourhood has a well-established style or character. I believe the proposal doesn't relate well to the character and context of the existing area, and it doesn't result in a balanced appearance. It's a large, flat-roofed white box tacked on to a traditional red brick and tile house in an estate of similar houses. The planning officer says that other properties in the estate have undergone alterations, either to the rear or to the side. That's correct, but they've used matching brickwork and tiled roofs so that their alterations complement their existing houses and blend into the surrounding area. The current proposal doesn't do that. Indeed, it makes no attempt to blend in. Paragraph 2.10 provides, the design of the roof of any extension is a major factor in successfully integrating the extension into the existing building. Attention should be paid to the appropriate type of roof profile and roof pitch. Flat roofs are generally only appropriate where they are a characteristic feature of the original house, concealed by a parapet, or a relatively minor and incidental element to the rear of the property. I don't believe the planning application meets any of those requirements. The existing house doesn't have any flat roof element to it. It is not concealed by a parapet on the north elevation, and in no way can a 10 metre by 4.5 metre flat roof design be regarded as a minor or incidental element to the rear of the property. The planning officer says that many properties in the Falkirk area have flat roofs. With respect, that is not the test. Those flat roofs may be appropriate to the context of their area or simply expand upon an existing house design. The issue here is that there is no precedent of planning permission having been granted for a flat-roofed extension in this development, and certainly not one of 10 metres by 4.5 metres in size. I raised concern about water runoff from a flat roof, particularly given the close proximity to my boundary on the north elevation. The planning officer says it would not be reasonable or proportionate to require details in relation to surface water and drainage. Yet paragraph 2.3 specifically imposes a planning requirement that extensions should minimise the degree of impermeable surfaces to reduce surface runoff. By their very nature, flat roofs are impermeable surfaces. The existing garden room has integrated guttering to ensure adequate drainage in heavy or prolonged rainfall. The proposed flat roof does not. Paragraph 2.11 provides the external materials and detailing used in extensions should reflect and complement the existing house and be chosen with care to avoid harming the integrity of the original building. Generally, the same or compatible materials should be used.
Final minute, Mr. McLaughlin. Thank you, sir.
Proposed alterations should reflect the character of the original building in respect of material type, colour, texture and roof materials. I have significant concerns regarding the proposed materials, particularly white render. In my view, it is ill-suited and out of character with the original residential building and with the area. It would make the extension look like an add-on to the building rather than complementary to it, and it would be unsightly to the surrounding area. The planning officer considers the proposal acceptable because he says it makes use of a contemporary design palette, whilst conceding that the materials do not match the property. The question for you is whether you believe a 10-metre by 4.5-metre flat roof white box is in harmony with the well-established style or character of the area, and indeed whether it complements the existing house. The planning officer has suggested that the applicant has sought to meet my concerns by double slatting the boundary fence. With respect, the boundary fence is 1.8 metres high. The extension is 3.2 metres. It's almost twice the height. Double slatting it will make negligible difference. Likewise, the wooden battens proposed on the upper edge of the north elevation won't hide the white rendering. And if anything,
sorry, Mr. McLaughlin,
last paragraph.
Your time.
If anything, I think it makes the overall design worse. In conclusion, the planning application before you pays no attention to detail of the local architectural style. It seems to me to be completely ill-suited in size, design and materials to the character of the area. It is in breach of NPF 4 and the provisions of SGO 3, and I would urge each of you to reject the application on that basis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your summary, Mr. McLaughlin. Now it's an opportunity now to open up for members who can give any direct questions to Mr. McLaughlin regarding his summary. Anybody like to come in at this point? Anybody on remote? Any questions of the objector? Just going round the room again. No questions to the objector. Okay then, Mr. McLaughlin, thank you very much for your time. We'll now go straight into debate and we'll open up to members. Member like to come in at this stage? Councillor Bowes, then Councillor Steenbank.
Mr. Dryden, I understand the objection. I do understand though that it's quite, because we do it ourselves and we actually build our own houses at the moment. We use a finished brick face and then we use the white render as well. Has there been any conversations in it? And it's obvious, and I'm not trying to degrade it, but it's a neighbour dispute on this inquiry. Has there been conversations about maybe changing it from the render to a finishing brick, which seems would be a big part of the solution?
So yes, Councillor. So there's been discussions with myself and the applicant's agent, and the application was amended slightly, but not in terms of necessarily materials on that side. What they decided to do was create a sort of double slatting fence at a high level. The idea of the extension was they wanted a sort of modern addition to the property, and that was the design of the extension as a whole. They didn't really want to change the design of the extension because that wasn't really their approach and what they wanted for their property. And as like every individual is entitled to do what they want to their property, and as long as it doesn't significantly impact other people. But yeah, we would not consider the design of the extension to be significantly contrary. The issues raised in terms of like a detrimental impact. So the wording of the policy is significantly detrimental impact. So what is detrimental? So everything is going to have an impact, but it's really about the level of impact that would have. And in this instance, would not consider the design of the extension to be significantly contrary to planning policies. So yeah.
Can you, sorry, well, last with it, because the only one other thing you did say, you touched on it, and can you maybe expand on it a wee bit about this 150 mil, and if it'd been 150 mil lower, because that's quite a significant thing that they actually wouldn't. Am I guessing right that you said they wouldn't actually have had to go for planning permission at all, and there would be no control of it?
Yeah, so we discussed that with the applicant's agent and the applicant themselves, and if they wanted to basically reduce the height of the extension, and they decided against that, they did wish it to go through the planning process to ensure that all due process was followed. But yes, if the extension was reduced slightly in height, it wouldn't require a planning application, and therefore we would have no controls in terms of design, overshadowing, privacy, or anything like that. But of course, that being said, we would not consider the extra 0.15 centimetres or at all the extension to be contrary to planning policy. Yes.
Any other member like to come in, either in the room or remote? Councillor Steenbank.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I just want to clarify, obviously, with an SGO 3, with extensions, and as Mr McLaughlin has stated, it is a rather large extension, that garden size, an average garden size across the community will be a focus. Could we just get some elaboration on how that was assessed in relation to this application?
Right.
Yes, in terms of garden size, so there's in the existing plot already, there's an existing summer room, but in terms of this application, if I don't know whether or not Jack's able to show the proposed composite plan again to give committee members an idea of it. But in essence, the existing extension would not project any further into the garden ground than what the proposed the proposed extension would not project any further into the garden ground than what the existing already does. It would, of course, take up an extra area of the garden ground, but the ground to the rear of the property we would consider significant in order to provide room for like leisure provision or for storage of materials or for general amenity purposes. But as you can see there, it's like the existing extensions, basically the hexagonal rectangle to the left hand side of the screen. So that's as far as extension would project, and in essence that's the existing extension that's already there projects that further as well. So yeah, I don't know if that helps at all, Councillor Steinbach.
Yeah, that definitely does in terms of the garden size question. Right, I'm just going to turn to SGO3 again in relation to the householder checklist. There is a question in there that householders are asked before they engage in an extension to think about whether the design materials complement the existing house. I think it would be important just to get a firmer definition on what complementary means within this context. So could I get some elaboration on that, please?
Mr Dryden.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, Councillor Steinbach. As you probably know, in planning is a subjective matter, particularly with regard to design. What is good design? And this is equivalent is a contemporary design. I think it's down to each individual to decide on whether they want to follow a traditional extension. But in this case, as the applicant, as is the right, they wanted to propose a contemporary design that complements the character of that building. And a contemporary design, as we all know, can vary in terms of use of materials and its appearance. And I think certainly it's not trying to exactly replicate what the materials are on that building, but I think by using a contemporary design, it provides a modern interpretation of their proposed living requirements in respect of their existing dwelling house. And as you've heard this morning in the report, and as the guidance is there, it is guidance SGO3, it is part of the development plan, but the policies do support proposals that are complementary to the property to which it relates, and it is the view of officers that this proposal does that.
Okay, I'm going to slightly rephrase. I appreciate the answer to the question. Without getting into hypotheticals, is using that subjective example, is there any situation in which materials wouldn't be complementary if we're using a subjective assessment?
It will depend on a number of factors, but clearly, if, for example, where you have certain areas where there are conservation areas or listed buildings, again, it's not to say that you can't have a contrast. I think we have to look at each case and its merits. It's a combination of the design proposed and the use of the materials, and it's one of these ones which is always going to be subjective, but is the view that, and there are examples across the council's area of such examples, but we have to look at each case and its merits, and it is our view here, the scale, the massing, it is obviously, as you've heard from the case officer, the actual extension of the actual extension is not over dominating the rear garden nor the rear elevation, and it's not creating any issues of privacy, loss of privacy, or overshadowing in particular as well. This is something down to the design of it, and as you've heard already from Mr McLaughlin this morning, which is right, he has a different view. The officers have a different view of that, and we also appreciate, as you'll know, being on the planning committee, design can be a subjective matter.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Dryden. I'm going to then go to 2.11 SGO3 again, appreciating everything that's been said so far. The external materials and detailing should reflect and complement the existing house. Perhaps just trying to understand how that word reflect really operates within that policy, because that would suggest to me, obviously understanding its guidance, a far more closer to the original design requirement that's been laid down there.
I think it comes down to, again, it is guidance. The SG is part of it is guidance, and there is a degree of interpretation. I think also what you have to bear in mind is clearly when we're looking at extensions, we sometimes want extensions to be, they are an extension. They're not the main dwelling house to which it relates. It's down to individuals concerned how they want to interpret that and reflect that. I think what's being proposed here is to show a modern additional add-on to the existing property, albeit it's a modern property. And I think the proposal and the design interpretation here is to reflect that this is an add-on in a sympathetic manner, and the use of the materials along with the design reflects that. It's not trying to make an exact match to that dwelling house, and clearly the guidance that we have out there and our policies do allow that flexibility, but it will vary from degree on location and locality, and it's felt this reflects a modern contemporary add-on. It can be read as an extension to the main property to which it relates.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate the degree of flexibility. My questions were just designed around finding where the boundary was. No further questions, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steenbank. Councillor Redmond.
Just about, you've already covered that a wee bit, but the existing extension, has that got a flat roof on it, or is that a hip roof? So is the plan to take that down and then build a completely new?
Yeah, so it's quite, so whenever we're calling it an extension, it is in essence an extension, but it was built as part of the original property. Right. So that extent, that flat, that doesn't have a flat roof. No, it's got a slight pitched roof, and it's, the proposal is in essence to take parts of that down and take parts of the roof down. Yes, but yeah, we're calling it an extension, but in essence it is built with the original property. Right. But yeah.
So part of it's been said that the new extension will be 10 metres wide, but part of that's already at the existing property, maybe three, maybe 4 metres. Would you?
Yeah, I can get the measurement for you just now. So the existing extension sitting at 3.78 metres. And then you're going up to like 10 metres from what's proposed, which is not, it's near enough the full width. There's obviously a wee bit of gap between the walls of the dwelling house and the start of the main bit, but yeah, it does stretch the rear wall of the dwelling house. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just looking at the back on page 56, we've got the existing extension, and then you've got the applicant's garage as well. So really, the extensions between two of the applicant's own buildings, really. Right.
Yeah, the extension projects, and yeah, so it doesn't project any further towards the neighbouring property. No, right. It projects between the current extension and the garage. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Redmond. Any other member like to come into the debate at this stage? Anybody on remote? I'm just searching to see if there's anybody. Well, how do members feel then in relation to this application? We've heard the objector, we've heard the officers, a number of questions have came forward, and so it's up to members now how they feel about the situation. We've got to take a decision. Councillor Bowes.
Thank you, Convener. Listen carefully to the objector and what he was saying, what Ryan has been saying, and what Ian has been saying as well. And from what I can see, the application complies with our planning policy, and we have to take. I feel we have to take Ryan and Ian's opinion on that. There is sometimes dramatic changes in buildings. I work in the construction industry and I've seen it. It's if it had been a listed building or a building of historic importance, I would understand the dramatic change, and I think that's probably when you're talking about the changes in materials. I'm somebody that's kind of keen on keeping materials similar, but ultimately it's not my house and it's not my design, and the recommendations from yourselves is to approve it because it complies with regulation. Therefore, I will propose that we approve it.
Bowes has moved the recommendation contained within the report to approve. Have we got a seconder for Councillor Bowes? Councillor Kelly?
I'll second it.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much then. Thank you everybody for that. So we'll agree. Are anybody otherwise minded Motion moved and seconded. Gone to remote. A motion moved and seconded to agree the recommendation contained within the report to approve. Anybody otherwise minded? Agreed? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay then, thank you very much. That takes us to item 8 on your agenda papers, which is construction of dwelling house and associated infrastructure at Airlie House, Caronvale Road, Larbert, for Mr Graham Fletcher. It's pages 57 to 76. The report is going to be by Mr Ian Dryden, but once again we have a deputation request. An application had been made by Mr Graham Fletcher, the applicant, to be received as a deputation to be heard in respect of this item of business. I'm quite happy to agree to hear Mr Fletcher.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we'll get two members away on comfort breaks, we'll call it. Is there any chance?
Oh well, we'll have a comfort.
Can we have a 10-minute comfort break before we go? Because other than that, people miss parts of it.
Okay, thank you very much. It's an opportunity now to reconvene this meeting, and we'll go straight into item 8, which is a construction of dwelling house and associated infrastructure at Airlie House, Caronvale Road, Larbert, for Mr Graham Fletcher. It's pages 57 to 76. The report is going to be by Mr Ian Dryden, but before that we have a deputation request by Mr Fletcher, the applicant, to be heard as a deputation in respect of the item of business. I'm quite happy to move that we hear Mr Fletcher. Members agree to that?
Agreed.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. It's now then an opportunity for Mr Dryden.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, this application before you is a full planning application for the construction of a dwelling house with associated infrastructure comprising a new access off Caronvale Road at Larbert. Jack, if I could ask you to pull up the site layout plan, the actual location plan for members is actually on page 76 of your report package this morning. That will clearly show the location of the site being proposed here within the grounds of Airlie House. But as you can see on the screen, that is the location of it in the red line, and that plan does also show trees which are on the site. These trees are covered by tree preservation order, therefore have protection, and that shows the proposal in relation to that. Jack, if I could also maybe take the opportunity to show the next photograph. I think there's an elevations plan which we useful. You could show that up, and then when I'm talking, then show the photograph of the site for context for members. So turning to your report, I would draw attention to paragraph 3.5, in particular the site history, and you will see there has been relatively recent site history where there was an application for a dwelling house back in 2021, and you will note within that this was actually refused through the local review board on February 22. So there is some relevant planning history which you will see from the report is considered a material consideration as part of the officer assessment. Turning to the consultations in paragraph 4, there are no objections from roads nor the Environmental Protection Unit. But I would draw attention to committee to paragraph 4.3, the council's landscape officer, and you'll be aware, as I advised, the site is covered by a tree preservation order, and there is concerns in relation to the impact of trees on this application site, which is currently the subject of this proposal. Regarding public representation, you will note in paragraph 6.1 there have been 12 contributors. 10 of those are objections, 2 are representations submitted to the council as well. Not the other 2 are not saying they are objecting, but certainly they raise some valid points. And a summary of the representations are covered in paragraph 6.1 of that report. Turning to your development plan, as you're now familiar, National Planning Framework 4 is now a part of your development plan. And in particularly in here in paragraph 7A4, you will see there are policy 6 on forestry, woodland and trees. And as part of that assessment, this kind of complements similar policies within your LDP2, which is policy PE20, trees, woodland and hedgerows. And there is a concern that in the absence of an updated tree protection survey or current tree survey being undertaken, there remains a concern with the trees, the root protection and crown spread, that this proposal would actually have an adverse impact on the trees. There is also concern, I would draw attention particularly to the officer's summary of the planning history. On paragraph 7B4, you will see from actually an earlier appeal back in 2007, the reporter at the time did make reference in his decision that this particular location, while it's not listed Airlie House, actually Airlie House in the grounds do has got qualities in this immediate locality, and it does provide an attractive street scene with a front lawn, provides an appropriate foreground and dignified setting for the house. And again, it's the view of officers that stance, that observation is still relevant to this day. And obviously, as I've highlighted already, there is also the recent appeal decision that was taken by the review board back in 22, and these are both strong material considerations which really, in summary, the concern remains that the proposal would have an adverse impact on the amenity setting, street scene of Airlie House and Caronvale Road, and also combined with that the loss of tree and impact on trees which would have a detrimental impact. While obviously the design is there and there have been some subtle changes to this proposal when compared to the last application that was before the council in its capacity as a review board, these are not significant changes, and it is the view of officers, convener, that there has been no change or substance in the change to support the application. And you'll note on paragraph 7C1 on page 68, the officer concludes this, and the recommendation is to refuse. Thank you, convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dryden. It's an opportunity now for Mr. Fletcher to bring himself up, and you have 10 minutes, Mr. Fletcher, to summarise your application, and then there'll be an opportunity for members to ask any questions.
Just try to share the slides. Yeah. Right, cool. Right, well, good afternoon. Sorry, good morning still. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to make a deputation this morning. It is appreciated. What I plan to do is I'll just give an overview of the site and how it views, to give you a little bit more context, and then there has obviously been two possible reasons for rejection that have been highlighted, so I will discuss them in turn throughout my time. I don't come from a planning, building, development background in any way, shape or form, so please, if you do have questions, obviously I'm very happy to try my very best to answer them, and obviously happy to support things like site visits and stuff as well. So this is the site in question. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the site in question. If we can see it, can we see? Yeah, we do. So I've marked in red. I know, as you say, it's a little bit bright in here, but this is Carnvale Road where I live. It does actually state there something about a free church school. I'm pretty sure there's not a school or a church right in front of my house. I think I'd have noticed if it was there. I think that reflects the Boys Brigade Centre down the road. So apologies, that's a failing of Google's, but it does show you, if you look at the east side of the street, is a fairly regular street line of houses. If you look at the west side of the street where I live, there is a slightly less regular, but a regular flow of housing along the same housing line as the proposed development that you'll see marked in red there. And it's a case that there's lots of larger manor houses with other houses in front of them. So you've got like Beechmount House with a house in front of it, the listed Woodcroft House, the housing in front of it, Airlie House, and I'm actually not looking to put something in front. One of my main issues, it's not a tandem development, it's actually going to be an infill plot. This is a plot with nothing behind it. The full development is to the side of my current property in what I'd call an infill area, and it continues along the housing line. So you can see the position of other properties there. A little bit more view of the site. That's it from the road looking up. So obviously the development is to be to the side of the white house there, which is Airlie House where I live. So it's to be in the side plot here, facing onto the main road. And these are another couple of pictures, just it gives you an idea, I guess, of the tree coverage. Position of the house will be at the far corner. If you look on the left picture, the far corner here, I guess over towards where the football goal is, but it gives you an idea of the amount of tree coverage. I took this photo just at the weekend, so obviously you can see the trees are still pretty bare just now, but in the next few weeks obviously they'll become green, and it will be a very, very green site location, as you can imagine. So the first point of contention that I've got is there's a question about removing a tree that is contrary to the tree prevention order. A couple of points about that, and these are just a couple of views of the tree from across and from the bottom of the site. Firstly, it is a fast-growing evergreen tree. To be honest, I didn't really think that would be considered by the tree prevention order. It's a multi-stemmed, you see, with multiple cuts and things at the bottom of it. I didn't even think that would be something that should really be a consideration. It is not a native tree to Scotland. The Western Red Cedar is similar to a Landi or something that you might be more familiar with. It is from the Pacific Northwest to North America. It is not a Scottish mature tree. The other sort of points so I just want to sort of raise is, you know, these things like replanting. So for the removal of this one non-native tree, I'm looking to put forward a replanting position as well of two deciduous native trees to Scotland, something like lime that wouldn't be effective to, it wouldn't affect the bees or whatever in the area, and it would be of a certain height and standard before planting, sort of 2.5 metres minimum at time of planting. I've also, and this is probably why this first issue was surprising to me, is I'd actually shown the site pegged out to the landscape officer for Falkirk Council, Elspeth Forsyth, prior to submitting my request. So I had shown her that prior to submitting it, and she expressed she had no concerns with the location of the proposed property based on the trees. She had concerns with a previous application, but having adjusted it, she did express to me she had no concerns. And in fact, of the tree that's getting removed also, I just want to add there's over 100 of them in the garden already. The whole front hedge is made up of evergreen cedar, so I'm looking to remove one tree. Admittedly, it's quite large now, it's quite tall, but these sort of evergreens do grow quite tall, but there's multiple of them, as you can see. The picture of the front hedge there, you can see I've obviously cut a lot of them back already, so I think to form a nicer street view since I moved into the property a few years back. In addition to that, obviously we have the view of the house there, and the main purpose of the house being that sort of L shape that you'll see it is to sort of encompass the garden, to allow the trees and the natural landscape of the garden to flow around the property. And all the mature trees, and as you saw them, if I can jump back, you can see them there and there sort of thing. You can see all the mature trees, none of them are to be touched. All this sort of deciduous large trees, you know, lime, beech, birch, etc. All these sort of things not to be touched, and if appropriate, protected during any construction work. Going the wrong way here. The second point of order, I guess, the second point of concern was around this point here. I put it on the screen. I know you've all got in your notes, but existing natural heritage. So obviously I've discussed the trees at length. Built heritage, just want to point out that Airlie House, I can share pictures of it if you want. It's not listed property. It's not in a conservation area. It's built in the 1900s. So it's not. I don't think it should be considered in the same way as other properties. You know, I heard somebody talking about listed buildings earlier. Tandem development, you know, it's in a gap. It's not a tandem development, and if it was a tandem development, I don't believe it would be unacceptable. And then when it comes to the impact on the view out from the lower property, which is the final concern raised, the only windows on the front face of Airlie House are bedrooms. There's no public rooms. There's no kitchens, there's no patio areas facing onto the proposed plot. It's literally just only bedrooms, and I can share that a bit more if you want. So just to address, I guess, the infill plot, and as I say, I don't know if I can expand that, but you can see it is not a tandem development. There's nothing behind the proposed plot. Airlie House it's over 40 metres in length, including a stable block to the end. So it's over 40 metres in length, and there's no tandem development. It's completely, the actual building is to the side. There may be hedge work and things like that to form a boundary overlapping, I'll be honest, but the actual building has no overlap, which I think when you consider the other properties, as I say, you've got Woodcroft with houses in front of it, Beechmount House in front of it, and even Torwood Hall at the top here. It's got you may be familiar with it. Some people, it was a former care home. It's a large concrete extension on the front, and actually recently Paul Ketterick, who's the head of Invest Falkirk, actually suggested there was a suggestible proposal for somebody to buy this with 9 bungalows in the grounds of Torwood Hall. And I say I'm looking to put in one, definitely not. It's a single proposal development that I'm looking to put forward. Yeah, just to consider the outlook for the existing houses. This is the outlook from the rightmost window, or the most southern window, which is the bedroom window that I discussed from Airlie House, looking towards the plot. Due to the natural design of the garden and the existing coverage. You know, the view towards the site plot is very, very limited. We've barely seen at all. All right, okay. Yeah, so I guess just to maybe just comment on how it fits with the street. So the existing pattern of supporting service houses, this is about 50 yards down the road, a very similarly designed house. There is the architect for my design is the house that lives right next door of a very similar design with a sort of up and down windows. The neighbour, the only other person who overlooks the site, the owner-occupier of flat 1 of Airlie House, has no concerns about the development. He has not raised any objections and is happy with the proposals. And yeah, I think that's the main thing. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I've tried to address the trees and the impact on the setting with these different points that I've made, but happy to address any questions. And I've got a few other questions and things, a few other pictures and things as well, if you'd like to see them. Thank you.
Open it up now to members. Any questions? Councillor Bowes.
Mr. Fletcher, is there any other buildings on the street which are, let's say, out of place with the sort of historic buildings? I know the big historic buildings to one side. I know the area well. I live in Larbert. On the left-hand side, there's stone built lower height buildings. Is there any unusual looking buildings in that street? Because I think I'll probably be requesting at some point a site visit on this one, purely for this reason.
Oh. To be honest with you, Councillor Bowes, I'd be quite happy just to go with that at the moment. I think it would be beneficial. Then we can enter into a full debate once we've seen it. So if you're formally moving a site visit, I think it would be appropriate. I'm quite happy saying.
There's one specific building
right,
I would like the committee to see, because everybody would think it's all old, and there's a specific building which is
it's the one next door. Yes, so that's what I was. So do you mind me interrupting you?
No, hold on a second. So it would be an unaccompanied site visit?
Unaccompanied, yeah.
Right, so we'll go back to members here and members remote. We've got a motion moved and seconded to go for a site visit unaccompanied. Is there anybody got any other questions at this stage? Or is everybody happy to go on the site visit? And then, who's that? Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, Convener, I was just going to try and put my hand off, because I agree with your statement. I don't know the area at all, so it'd be nice to go and see the full outlay of the area.
Fine, thank you. Councillor Flynn, you get your hand up, sir.
Yes, Convener. It was just one question which we may not be able to answer on a site visit for Mr. Fletcher. The garden that would belong to this new house, if permission was granted, you explained about the one tree, but how many other trees would be in the garden of the new house, just so that we know? And are these trees currently with tree protection orders on them? It's just so that we know when we go on a site visit, we'll know what's what.
So in the garden of the new house, there would be one large tree to the right on the boundary, which would be covered by a tree protection order, yes.
And would that belong to the new house, or would it still be the existing house?
One would belong to the new house, yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you.
I can actually show you, if I can see the pictures, and show you a picture out if you wish.
Fine. Well, I think when we go out in site, we're going to have a really good view. If members are agreed to that, we haven't finalised it yet. Any other member get any other questions, or is everybody happy? Councillor Steinby, I've got to apologise, because I find it very difficult to actually see anybody for this distance, and it might be that I'll have to bring in a telescope or a pair of binoculars the next time we arrive. Okay, Councillor Steinby.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I was only putting my hand up and I'll follow up to Councillor Flynn's question. So, got a question for Mr. Fletcher first of all. In terms of this development, do you see any way that you could go ahead with the development without felling the one tree that has clearly been cropped up in this discussion?
Not without moving the property. I mean, I would rather keep the property to the side of Airlie House, if that makes sense. So not have it as a tandem development. I'd rather put it to the side. Hence, I think that's the reason it is in that space. But as I say, I don't believe this tree is. And I actually had a note, and I don't think I commented on it in the. It's no
the tree survey that we had done by Caledon Trees Survey Company actually did state, it's a Class C tree with no material conservation value. It didn't bring any value to the garden, that tree, or classed as a grade C and on ABC scale. So I think my point remains that, I was actually quite surprised that there was any mention of it in the report, to be honest, having had that conversation with the landscape planning team before.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Steinbein.
Yeah, thank you very much. It might be a question for officers then on policy 6, just off the back of that, NPF 4. How, I'm just having a look at it now, it seems particularly very almost prescriptive and quite clear that you can't really, if it's any loss of ancient woodlands. So is that applicable to one tree even amongst the multiple that exist on this site? Is that how we're applying it in this case?
Mr. Dryden.
Yeah, Councillor Steinbein, I think certainly the policy is very relevant, and I think obviously there's one matter along with the issue of setting on the tree. Obviously, tree protection, tree preservation order is very important. It's obviously deemed to make a contribution. Obviously, you heard Mr. Fletcher and his view from the survey, but obviously our landscape officer has obviously given her view, which is articulated in the report, and there remains a concern about the impact the loss of this tree would have in the round with obviously other aspects of the proposals that stands.
No, definitely. I was just raising the concerns, convener, that obviously we've got the national policies that we're bound to follow, but as Councillor Bush said, I grew up in the area as well. I think it would be very useful for members to actually see the character of the area. Cheers.
Input, sir. Any other questions, or are we agreed to an accompanied site visit? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. That takes us to item 9. I've already declared an interest, so I will remove myself from the premises, and the Deputy Convener, Councillor Kelly, will take over and he will close the meeting. Thank you.
Afternoon, guys. Let's see. So we go to agenda item 9, construction of agricultural workers dwelling house at land to the east of Loch Green. And I think Brent is going to.
Yep.
Yeah, right, Brent.
Thank you. Yep. Jack, can I just ask you to have the drawings ready, starting with the location plan? Just I'll refer to the drawing shortly.
Jack's not here at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Jack.
Jack, it was just if you could have the drawings on standby, starting with the location plan. I'll refer to the drawings in a moment. This application seeks full planning permission for the construction of a dwelling house for an agricultural worker. The application site forms part of Loch Green Farm, which lies on Loch Green Road south of Bonnybridge. Loch Green Farm extends to 31.13 hectares and is an agri business consisting of 3 flocks of lowland sheep, annual lamb production for commercial sale, sharing and sale of fleeces, and 2 annual silage cuts for commercial sale. The applicant is the farm owner and the manager, and he employs an agricultural labourer. Both the farm manager and labourer are described in the application as living off-site The manager resides in a dwelling house next to the farmland known as Hawkey Dubs Cottage. The labourer currently lives in Shield Hill. The application is accompanied by a labour requirement assessment, accounts information, a supporting statement from the farm labourer, and a mineral risk assessment report. The location plan is before you. The application site is the red enclosed area. The rest of the farmland is outlined in blue on the plan. Jack, if you could bring up the block plan, please. This plan shows the application site with the footprint of the proposed new dwelling house and the access into the site, which is from an existing field access within the actual site itself. You can bring up the elevations. And the elevation showing a single-story dwelling house, which is three bedrooms in terms of the size. And if you could bring up a photograph as well, Jack, please. It's entitled View West. The site itself proposed for the house is behind the mature hedge that you can see along the road frontage. Beyond the hedge, the farm buildings on the site, and beyond the buildings, beyond the farm buildings is Hawkey Dubs Cottage, which I referred to previously. And lastly, Jack, if you could just bring up the photograph entitled Field Access. It shows the site itself beyond the field gate. It's an open area which is comprises part of the field. Thank you, Jack. Turning to the consultations, no issues have been raised in the consultation responses. The Coal Authority is satisfied with the mineral risk assessment report. They're satisfied that it demonstrates that the site is or can be made safe and stable for the proposed development. The council's flooding team withdrew their initial request for a flood risk assessment as explained in paragraph 4.5 of your report before you. The Bonnybridge Community Council has not made any representations and no public representations have been received. Turning to the local development plan, the application site lies out with the urban and village limits within the countryside as defined in LDP2. The main policy under LDP2 in considering the application is policy HC05, housing in the countryside. This policy supports proposals for housing development in the countryside of a scale, layout and design suitable to the intended location in certain circumstances. These circumstances include housing required for the pursuance of agriculture. In this case, the applicant's contention is that the proposed dwelling house is necessary to support an existing agricultural business comprising livestock and silage production. Detailed guidance on the application of the policy criteria is contained in the Council Supplementary Guidance SG01 Development in the Countryside and is considered in paragraphs 7b.3 to 7b.7 of your report. The guidance is not considered to be fully met as explained in those paragraphs, and the reason for this relates to the operational need for the proposed additional house not having been demonstrated, taking into account the apparent availability of Hawkey Dubs Cottage to serve or help serve the operational need for the farm. The scale, layout and design of the proposed dwelling house are considered to be suitable for the intended location. The dwelling house is single story and reflects simplicity of form and moderate height and width. As members will be aware, National Planning Framework 4 was adopted by Scottish ministers earlier this year and now forms part of the development plan. The relevant policies in Gear 4 are not considered to raise any issues of incompatibility with LDP2 in the assessment of this application or raise any new issues in considering the application. In conclusion, the application is not considered to accord with the development plan. It is not considered that the case for the proposed agricultural workers dwelling house has been fully demonstrated at this point in time. It is important to highlight that further information and clarification has been sought from the applicant but not provided, and the applicant has requested that the application be determined. On that basis, the recommendation is carried forward to refuse the application for the reasons detailed in paragraph 9.1 of your report. Happy to answer any questions and, if necessary, go into more detail in relation to the outstanding issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Any questions to Brent? No, no one. The screen's difficult to see. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, convener. Brent, with this application no come into permitted development with the size area for the house that's already there? As we heard in a previous application, the site for that extension, if it was to a certain height, it could have wait for permission.
An application for a new dwelling house requires planning permission, councillor.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. Anyone else? No? No. Sorry? Sorry, Councillor Bowser.
That's fine, convener. Brent, I'm just trying to get a hold on the labour requirement, because that seems to be an important thing in whether they should be there. It says it is considered that a labour requirement of at least 2 persons would normally be required to justify proposed dwelling. Now that tells me that's quite a flexible thing, because it's not saying, if it had said that 2 persons, that the requirement of at least 2 persons would be required, that would be fine, but it doesn't. It said would normally be required. And that to me puts a question in my head on whether it needs the 2, and therefore what's the effect then if we're looking at the labour hours and it's only 1 person. So I don't know if that's clear enough for you, Brent, what I'm asking.
Right.
How firm is that 2 persons? Because it doesn't read as being firm. It reads as being flexible.
Yeah, I mean, I can clarify that in all cases I've dealt with involving agricultural dwelling houses, you need to overall be at a point where you can demonstrate that each person involved in the farm practice is employed on a full-time basis, which is equivalent to 1,900 hours per annum. I mean, I suppose the reason that the word normally has perhaps been inserted is to suggest that there may be occasions when there could be justification to consider a lesser requirement, but certainly in this case we're not at a point where we think it's been demonstrated to us that is the case. And certainly is in my experience, we haven't never considered flexibility in that regard, but not to say we couldn't if the individual circumstances could justify it. But as I said, we haven't had the information that we would require to get to a point where we could consider that flexibility.
Thanks, Brent. Just the other thing, there's quite a big part of this report is put down purely to the labour hours being used on it, and it starts to get quite complicated when you get into it. It's not simple by any manner of means. There's a first calculation, there's a second calculation, there's questions over the hours. You're saying it's 1900 hours, which I can see in one part. I can see other parts it talks about other hours as well. Can you maybe just go through that bit in a little bit more detail, just so we can understand it a bit better?
Yeah, I mean, I fully accept it's not straightforward. It's reasonably technical, and it is essentially the sole issue with this application. It's around the labour requirement test. One of the criteria under our supplementary guidance relates to a need to demonstrate the operational need for the additional house in association with the business. The key consideration in assessing operational need is the labour requirement. The standard labour requirement, as agreed by the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs and the Scottish and Northern Ireland equivalents, is 1900 hours per annum, as I said, and that's taken to equate to full-time employment. To calculate the labour requirement, the normal approach is to use the methodology set out in the Farm Management Handbook, which gives categories of various types of livestock and crop farming uses, and gives figures against each category in order to allow you to come up with a total calculation for labour hours. In this case, the applicant has used this methodology, which gives a labour requirement of 1.45, which I would argue on the face of it wouldn't support an additional dwelling house. That the labour requirement is too low. But perhaps unusually in my experience, the applicant has also provided an alternative calculation, which is said to be based on the evidence of the farm manager and the farm worker, and that gives a higher labour requirement of 2.13, which would tend to suggest that it could support the additional house. I think the difficulty we have is that it's not something that we've come across before in terms of looking at an alternative methodology. It's always the handbook that is used as the methodology for assessing these things, and because of that, we did ask for further information from the applicant to try and understand the difference between the two calculations. In terms of hours, the difference is quite significant. It comes to 1288 hours. And also to try and understand whether the use of an alternative to the handbook methodology is accepted in practice. The applicant's tried to go some way towards explaining the difference and has put that down to some extent to miscellaneous labour inputs. We've asked for an explanation of what types of labour inputs might fall under the category of miscellaneous, but again, that's a matter which remains outstanding. I think from our point of view, it is fundamental to the application to understand the points around the labour requirement for the farm, and as I said, at least a labour requirement of 2 would normally be required to support a second house, and that in this instance that takes into account the existing dwelling house, which as we understand it, is available to contribute to meeting the operational need for the farm. So I hope that helps to some extent, Councillor. I fully appreciate that the report does go into a lot of detail. It is quite a technical matter to try and get your head around.
Sorry, Convener, may I? Thanks for that. It's put a little bit more light on this. That there's obviously a set amount, but in this case you've got some additional support through the farm manager's book, basically on ours is what you're telling us. When I look at the final paragraph though, and when they split up the difference, I'm assuming we don't have any problem with the 1612 hours for lowland sheep, 385 hours for silage, which would have been over the 1900 hours anyway. But there was a slight concern at 233 hours. I'm sure farm labourers do more than, I'm sure there'll be many things that they'll do, and 233 hours is 4 and a bit weeks work. I would imagine that could quite easily be covered in a number of things. Okay, my difficulty on this one is I've never really followed in the past on houses in the countryside. This one seems to stand and fall by the hours, and I am wanting to listen to what other people say on this, because I think I need to get this. It's not just my working out of numbers, and I'll be happy to listen to the rest of the committee and what they think on it.
Thanks, Councillor Bootham.
Is it, are we opening the floor up to debate now? Or sorry,
we're still talking to.
Sorry,
Brent.
I'll wait then.
Brent. Brent, can I ask you, are you expecting to get further information from them on this?
We have spent quite a bit of time to-ing and fro-ing and asking for further information. We've got to a point where we haven't received what we're looking for to our satisfaction, and the applicant, in fact, has asked us to proceed to have the application determined. So at this point in time, we're not expecting anything further.
So yeah, so really they're looking for a decision today, not looking for a continuation or anything.
Well, obviously that would be within the gift of members to decide whether to consider a continuation.
All right, thanks, Brent. Oh, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Convener. Apologies if it's already contained in the information in the papers, Brent, and apologies if you've already covered it. But I'm guessing that the applicant would rent this building or include it in the contract for a farm worker, or farm workers, whoever use it. And the second part of that is, what happens if the said farm workers leave? Do they get evicted, or, you know, I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable enough on this, but would the farm workers be evicted, and it be then part of the conditions that it would only be allowed to be existing farm workers in future?
The proposed house is intended for the farm labourer who currently lives at Shield Hill. Historically, we use legal agreements to tie in the continued occupancy of such dwelling houses by an agricultural worker. We've stepped away from that on the advice of the Scottish Government, who are not keen on councils imposing occupancy restrictions, and that's covered in paragraph 7b.5 of your report. The Scottish Government essentially says that if the council can be satisfied that an adequate case has been made for the house for the purposes of an agricultural dwelling house, there shouldn't be any need for any further formal mechanisms to restrict occupancy on the property in the future. So yeah, on that basis, if a case can be made and we accept that case, then we would go forward on that basis and not impose any restrictions in terms of future occupancy of the dwelling house.
Right. So in other words, if the farm worker resigned or indeed retired, because we don't know how old these workers are, there would be no obligation for them to leave the property, really, would there?
No, that's correct. Not in planning terms, no.
No. And my final question really is, can the applicant, if granted permission, at any time just sell this property?
Well, in planning terms, again, unless there was some restriction tied up through condition or legal agreement, then yeah, there wouldn't be any planning control over that.
Right. So you could build it, get a farm worker leaves, and potentially at some time just sell it to anyone out there in the public. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah, the only planning means to attempt to circumvent that would be to impose a relevant condition or legal obligation. But as I say, the Scottish Government's not keen on that approach.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you, Deputy Convener. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Flynn. Anyone else? Councillor St.
Thanks, Deputy Convener. Brent, were the committee to be minded to move for a continuation, would you be confident that the information and clarification that you've requested and so far not been provided would be forthcoming?
So it's difficult to say. Obviously, the fact that the application's been to committee and committee members have requested that information to assist them in their determination of the application could potentially hold, quite a bit of weight and encourage the applicant to come forward with further information. But as I said, to date, we've not had the success that we were hoping for to get the information that we were looking for.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Sinclair. Anyone else? That's no. Sorry. Councillor Steenbank.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up question of Councillor Sinclair's question. Would the applicant already have been aware that information may have been a determining factor, and that this application would be coming to today's committee?
Yeah, the applicant's fully aware of the issues around labour requirement as a determining factor, and also they're fully aware that the application's being considered today by committee.
Thank you. I thought that's just quite a relevant point in terms of follow-up, because obviously we can hope that if we did continue that it would come back with all relevant information, but we do have a process. So I'm a bit like Councillor Bowes on this one, and thanks for everybody's contributions.
Thank you, Councillor Steenbank. Any other questions? Brent? No. Okay, can we move then to discussion and debate on it?
Thanks, Convener. I think this sort of hinges off, this is going to kind of stand or fall on the Labour side of things. So in paragraph 1.3 it says it's a 31.13 hectares business, 3 flocks of lowland sheep, that's 400 head, annual lamb production for commercial sale, shearing and sale of fleeces, 2 annual silage cuts. I would have thought that would be at least 2 people. Common sense would kind of tell you that, irrespective of the sort of the formula. So I think we've had this before where people were meant to bring forward information, didn't do it, and we gave them opportunity to come back again with additional information, and maybe 2 or 3 times we've actually done that in some cases. So I would like to formally move a continuation on this and give the applicant an opportunity to come forward and sort of exhaust the process and bring to the table a bit more information on this. So I would like to formally move a continuation.
Thanks, Provost. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second.
Any disagreement? Any other viewpoint? Is it Councillor Steenbank?
Yeah, I'm quite content to continue, Deputy Convener, but perhaps I'll put this one to Mr Henderson. I do think that it's important for our process, and considering Mr Vivian's outlined that there would have been time and knowledge that we were deciding this today, to put a potential timeline in relation to this. Obviously, we've not got another meeting for a couple of months or so, but might be worthwhile. I'm just looking for officers' views and whether that would be a realistic proposal we could potentially amend to the Provost's proposal there.
Thank you, Councillor Steenbank. We've obviously got a motion and amendment at the moment, so it would need the agreement of the mover and the seconder if that was to be amended to introduce a timescale. I'm not entirely sure how long it would take for the applicant to pull together appropriate evidential information. It may be tight to hit the next committee, but I'm conscious we should have another committee in June. Thank you. I think Mr Dryden's wanting to come in.
Thank you. Yeah, I think given the motion here, I think it would possibly, given that this has obviously been extensive discussion with the officers and the applicant agent, I think it would be reasonable to suggest that we go back, if that's a continuous agreed, that bring it back to the next planning committee, because I think there's already been a lot of dialogue, and it should be something that could be provided. And obviously, if there's something that evolves as a result of that discussion that necessitates us to extend it, but I think we should try for the next planning committee, which is B.
Yep.
Anyone anything against that?
No, I think that's what I'm going to propose, that we do bring it back to the next committee meeting. I'll obviously open up to the current motion proposer to see if that's acceptable.
Provost.
I'd be happy to accept that.
Yeah, I think that's what we would have expected.
Okay, that's agreed then. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Deputy Convener. Listen to Mr Dryden. I think it's imperative. I mentioned it at the last meeting we had. It's people's lives we're dealing with here, and whether it's a yes or a no, it's people's lives. So the sooner it's back, the better. And I fully understand that we need to get enough information to make a decision, but making that decision in a prompt and appropriate manner is essential. So quite happy to go with the consensus of the committee.
Thanks, Councillor Kerr. So we have the motion. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. And I think it's worth maybe just having a go at what kind of information we're looking for from the applicant. I don't think that would be unhelpful at this stage. My notes of the discussion there have been that there is a motion and an amendment to continue consideration of the application to the next meeting of the Planning Committee to allow officers to seek additional information from the applicant in demonstration and providing evidence that there is an essential need for the proposed dwelling house to support the management of a rural business, and in particular on the labour requirement and explanation of the alternative methodology to that in the handbook proposed by the applicant. Does that wording, and maybe I'm asking Brent, does that summarise things appropriately?
Brent?
Yeah, I think you've covered it. You know, the key thing I think is to understand the alternative methodology which has been put forward, where it's usual to follow the handbook methodology. So I think you've covered it well.
Good. Could I just ask?
Councillor Edmund.
Just a bit of clarity on what we're asking here. We've not provided a coal board report and the flood risk assessment. So are we asking for the two things, but are we also asking them for further labour requirement things, or is it just the coal report and the flood risk assessment? Because I think that's the only two things I can really see that's.
Mr Henderson.
Yeah, I'll maybe bring in Mr Vivian, but my sense of the discussion and the motion and amendment was it was not so much about the coal report and flooding information, but particularly on the evidence of demonstration of the essential needs for the dwelling house to support the management of the rural business. So it was about the labour labour requirements towards that end.
Mr Henderson, did Brent not say that the flood risk assessment had been removed and the Coal Board were actually satisfied?
Oh, oh, sorry, I must have missed that.
Okay then, so we agreed on the motion with the amendment. Okay, thanks
Agreed.
everybody.
Agreed.
That brings us to the end of today. Thank you very much for your time. Look forward to another month.
Thank you, Deputy Convener.
Thank you. Bye.